Letter arrived on a Tuesday. I remember because I'd just come back from my water aerobics class, the one I go to every Tuesday morning at the YMCA on Elm Street, and I was still in my damn swimsuit when I opened the mailbox. There were 2 pieces of mail, a grocery circular from Kroger, and an envelope with the law firm's return address in the upper left corner. I stood there in my driveway in 60-degree October air, and I read it 3 times. My daughter was found out from mine Ian restraining order against me. The reason listed was harassment and unwanted intrusion into the private life of her family, as if I were not the woman who had held her head when she had pneumonia at age 7, who had driven 4 hours in an ice storm to be in the delivery room when her first child was born, who had taken out a second mortgage on this very house, this house I was standing in front of, to help her and her husband buy theirs. I sat down on the front step in my wet swimsuit, and I did not cry. I just sat there. The grocery circular slid off my lap and landed in the flower bed. I left it there. My name is not important to this story in the way names usually are. What matters is that I am 68 years old. I was a licensed practical nurse for 31 years at St. Augustine Medical Center here in Central Ohio. I retired 4 years ago when my knee started making decisions for me. I live alone in the house where my daughter grew up, where my late husband Harold spent the last 6 years of his life in and out of treatments. I will not describe because they do not belong in this story either. Harold passed in 2019, the year everything changed, though I did not know it then. My daughter, I call her by her relationship to me, because that is what she has always been to me before anything else. She is my daughter, lives 40 minutes away with her husband and their 2 children. My granddaughter is 9. My grandson is 6. Their names I will keep private because they are children and they did not ask for any of this. For 30 years before Haru passed, I was a good mother-in-law. I thought I was anyway. I brought food when they asked, and sometimes when they did not ask. But I could see they were exhausted. I picked up the grandchildren from school on Wednesdays so my daughter could get to her spin class. I repaired things in their house when they needed it, or I paid someone to repair them. When my son-in-law's car needed a new transmission 2 winters ago, I wrote the check without being asked twice. I was not a perfect mother-in-law. I know that now. I understand things now that I did not understand then. But what they did was not about my imperfections. It started as these things usually do, quietly. So quietly I almost didn't notice. It was about 14 months before the letter arrived. My daughter called me on a Sunday evening and she said, "Mom, we need to talk about some things." I said, "Of course, come over for dinner." She said she'd rather talk on the phone. That was the first signal I missed. She told me that she and her husband felt I was at their house too much. She said I came over without calling first sometimes, and that it made her husband uncomfortable. She said I had a tendency to, and this is the phrase she used, redirect the children's behavior in front of them, which undermined their authority as parents. I listened. I said I was sorry. I said I would call first. I said I didn't mean to undermine anyone. She said she knew that, and she appreciated it. She said she loved me. And then she said one more thing. She said that her husband felt the financial help over the years had created a dynamic that was, the word she used was complicated. She said they wanted to stand on their own going forward. I said I understood completely and I meant it. I hung up and I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and I thought, this is fine, this is normal. Young families need space. I can give them space. And I tried. I really did. I stopped coming by on Wednesdays without texting first. I stopped bringing over the casseroles I used to leave on their porch when I knew they'd had long weeks. I stopped offering to fix things. When my granddaughter called me from her little tablet and asked me to come to her school's fall festival, I texted my daughter first. "May I come?" My daughter said yes, and so I went. I sat in the bleachers 15 rows behind them. I did not approach. I waved at my granddaughter from across the gymnasium, and she waved back, and she looked confused, as though she didn't understand why her grandmother was so far away. I drove home trying to figure out what I had done wrong. 4 months after that phone call, they stopped responding to my texts at all. Not immediately, not all at once. It was gradual. A reply here, no reply there. Then mostly no replies. I texted my son-in-law to ask if the disposal I had arranged to be fixed the previous spring was still working well. He read it and did not respond. 3 days later, my daughter texted me, "Mom, we'd appreciate it if you don't text him directly." I wrote back, "Of course, I'm sorry." I drove to the YMCA that afternoon and I swam 40 laps and I did not let myself think about it until I got home. 2 months later, a woman named Patrice, she is my neighbor across the street, we have been friends for 12 years, told me she'd seen my daughter's husband at the hardware store and he had walked past her without acknowledging her, even though she'd had dinner at their house the previous Thanksgiving. Patrice is not a woman who misreads situations. She told me not because she wanted to upset me, but because she thought I should know. I was beginning to understand that something larger was happening, something I had not been told about directly. In September, 2 months before the letter, my granddaughter's birthday fell on a Saturday. I had bought her a gift weeks in advance, a watercolor set and a sketchbook, because she had told me the previous spring that she wanted to learn to paint. I texted my daughter, asking when I might drop it off. My daughter did not respond for 6 days. When she did, she said they had a full weekend, and it wasn't a good time. She said she'd let me know. She never let me know. I mailed the gift with a card. I never found out if my granddaughter received it. 3 weeks after that, the letter came. My first call was to my neighbor Patrice. She came over within 20 minutes, still in her gardening gloves, and she sat across from me at my kitchen table and read the letter herself. She read it twice. Then she set it down and she looked at me. She said, "You need a lawyer." I said, "Patrice, I don't even know what I did." She said, "That's exactly why you need a lawyer." His name was Gerald. No, wait, I am not supposed to use names. He was a family law attorney in Columbus, referred to me by my doctor, who had a client in a similar situation the previous year. He was in his 50s, calm in the way that people are calm when they have seen many things that should not be survivable. He read the letter. He read the supporting statement my daughter had filed, which listed in bullet points the specific incidents they considered harassment. The list was 9 items long. I will tell you a few of them because I need you to understand what was being called harassment. Attending my granddaughter's school fall festival without prior written consent, sending a birthday gift by mail after being told in-person contact was unwanted, except I had not been told in-person contact was unwanted, only that the weekend was full, leaving a voicemail for my daughter when she had not responded to texts for 11 days, which the filing described as repeated unwanted contact, and sending a card to my grandchildren for Christmas, which was described as an attempt to circumvent the established communication boundaries. A Christmas card, addressed to children who are my own grandchildren, that was on the list. My attorney read the list and he was quiet for a moment. Then he asked me one question: "Is any of this information inaccurate?" I said no. All of those things happened. I attended the festival. I mailed the gift. I left the voicemail. I sent the Christmas cards. He said, "Then we respond with the context, and we let the judge decide what any reasonable person would call harassment." He told me one more thing before I left his office. He said that in his experience, cases like this were rarely about what they appeared to be about. He said, "There is usually something underneath." Do you have any idea what it might be? I thought about it for a long time on the drive home. I thought about the transmission I paid for, the second mortgage, the conversations over the years when my son-in-law would make a comment and I, without thinking, would offer a different perspective, and he would go quiet in that way that I had always read as thoughtfulness, but perhaps was not thoughtfulness at all. I thought about a dinner 2 years ago when he said something dismissive about my late husband's side of the family, and I said, gently, I thought, that I didn't think that was quite fair. He had looked at me across the table in a way I had not forgotten, though I had tried. I thought I was beginning to understand what was underneath. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in November, 6 weeks after the letter arrived. I did not sleep the night before. I lay in Harold's side of the bed. I still sleep on my side. His side is still his side. And I watched the ceiling, and I thought about the last time I had hugged my granddaughter. It had been at Easter. 7 months before, she had pressed her face into my shoulder and said, "Grandma, you smell like cookies." And I had laughed and said, "I always smell like cookies," and she had laughed too. 7 months. I wore my navy blue dress and my low heels. I drove myself. My attorney met me in the hallway outside the courtroom, and we went over a few last things. My daughter was already inside. She was seated beside her husband, who was wearing a charcoal suit I had never seen before. They did not look at me when I came in. My daughter's hands were folded on the table. I looked at the back of her head and I thought, I know the exact weight of you. I carried you for 9 months and 41 hours of labor. I know the sound of every cry you ever made before you learned to use words. She did not turn around. My son-in-law's attorney opened by outlining the incidents from the list. He spoke about boundaries and autonomy and the right of a nuclear family to define its own structure. He used the word intrusive 4 times. He talked about emotional distress. My attorney's approach was quieter. He asked me a series of questions about each incident on the list, and I answered them plainly. Yes, I attended the festival. No, I did not approach my daughter or her husband. I sat in the bleachers and I watched my granddaughter perform in the choir. Yes, I mailed the birthday gift. My daughter had not responded to my request to deliver it in person, and I did not want my granddaughter to think I had forgotten her birthday. Yes, I left a voicemail. My daughter had not responded to texts or calls for 11 days, and I was concerned for her health. The judge, a woman, perhaps 60 herself, with silver-streaked hair pulled back and reading glasses on a chain, listened to all of it without expression. Then my attorney presented one more piece of evidence. It was a card, not one I had sent, one that had been sent to me. He had suggested, 3 weeks earlier, that I gather any communications I had received from my grandchildren. I had almost dismissed the idea because I assumed there were none, that they were too young and too managed for that. But then I remembered that my granddaughter had, over the past year and a half, slipped 3 small notes into my coat pocket on the rare occasions I had seen her. I had kept them in a drawer the way I keep everything she has ever made for me, because she is my granddaughter and I keep everything. The first note said, "Grandma, I miss you, please come back." The second said, "I love you the same as Mom and Dad. Don't be sad." The third, and this one she must have written recently because she had better handwriting than the others, said, "They say you're bothering us, but you're not bothering me. I want you here." The judge read all 3 notes. She read them slowly. When she looked up, she removed her reading glasses. She looked at my son-in-law, then at my daughter. Then she was quiet for what felt like a long time, but was probably 30 seconds. She said, "I have presided over many restraining order hearings. In those hearings I have seen genuine fear, genuine harm, situations that warranted the full weight of this court's protection. This is not one of those situations." She said, "What I see here is a grandmother who attended a public event without approaching the petitioners, who mailed a birthday gift to her granddaughter, who left a single voicemail after 11 days of no response, who sent Christmas cards to her grandchildren." She looked down at her notes, and I see a 9-year-old child who has written, unprompted, to tell her grandmother that she is not a burden. She denied the restraining order in full. Then she said something else. She said it to the room, but she was looking at my daughter's husband when she said it. She said, "Courts exist to protect people from harm. They are not instruments for managing family discomfort. Filing for a restraining order against an elderly woman for sending her grandchild a birthday card is not a legal matter. It is a family matter, and I would strongly encourage this family to treat it as one, with a therapist, not a judge." The room was quiet. I did not look at my daughter's face. I kept my eyes on my hands in my lap. I was afraid that if I looked at her, I would lose something I had been working very hard to keep hold of. Outside in the hallway afterward, my attorney shook my hand and told me I had conducted myself with dignity, which was a professional thing to say, and also one of the kindest things anyone said to me that year. I walked to my car alone. I sat in the driver's seat for a while before I could drive. That was 8 months ago. My daughter called me twice in the 2 weeks after the hearing. I did not answer either time. I am not proud of that, but I was 68 years old, and I had just spent 6 weeks preparing to defend myself in court against a list of things that included sending a Christmas card, and I needed a little time before I could speak to her without it showing in my voice. On the third call, I answered. She was crying. I had not heard her cry since her father's funeral. I sat in my kitchen and I listened, and I did not say anything for a long time. She said, "I don't know how things got this bad." I said, "I don't either." She said, "He convinced me you were doing it on purpose. The showing up, the money, all of it. He made it sound like you were trying to control us." I said, "And what do you think now?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think you were lonely. I think I stopped seeing you as a person." I have replayed that sentence many times since then. We are not where we were. I want to be honest about that because I think it matters to be honest. We have dinner together on the first Sunday of every month. My granddaughter hugs me the way she used to. My grandson has decided I am the best person to call when he wants to tell someone about things he has seen on nature documentaries, and I have learned more about deep-sea creatures in the past 4 months than in the previous 6 decades of my life, and I would not trade any of it. My son-in-law sits at the other end of the table. He is polite. We do not discuss what happened. I do not know if we ever will, and I have made a kind of peace with that, though it is the uneasy peace of people who are trying not to disturb something fragile. I have also done some things I should have done differently. I told a therapist I started seeing one in January because it seemed like time. I told her about the Sunday I showed up at their house without calling because I had made too much soup and I thought they could use it. She looked at me gently and she said, "What do you think that was about, really?" And I sat there for a minute and I thought about how quiet my house had been that particular Sunday. How Harold's chair in the living room had felt especially empty. How I had needed somewhere to put all of that, and I had put it into soup, and into a 40-minute drive, and into a doorstep delivery that I told myself was about them, but was also, I can admit now, about me. I am not the villain of this story, but I was not without fault in it either. I know that. I hold both of those things at the same time. The way you eventually learn to hold complicated things when you've been alive long enough. What I will not accept, what no court, no letter, no bullet-pointed list could make me accept, is that loving someone too much is a crime. That a grandmother who drives 40 minutes to see her grandchild perform in a choir and sits 15 rows behind her family to respect their space is a threat to anyone's safety or peace. That a Christmas card deserves a restraining order. I have been a nurse. I have held the hands of people in the last hours of their lives, people who were desperately trying to remember whether they had said enough to the people they loved. Not one of them in those last hours said, "I wish I had kept more distance." Not one. If there is anything I have learned from all of this, from the letter, the lawyer, the courtroom, the notes in my granddaughter's small handwriting, it is that time moves in one direction and love is not guaranteed to be received the way it is given, and you cannot control either of those things. You can only choose, every day, whether to keep showing up in whatever way you are allowed. My granddaughter called me last week on her tablet. She said she had painted something with the watercolor set, the one I had mailed over a year ago. She held it up to the camera. It was a house with a yellow door, and in front of it a small figure with grey hair, and above the figure she had written in careful letters, "Grandma's house." I told her it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. She said, "I'm going to make you one every week." I said, "I'll be here." I keep thinking about what my granddaughter wrote on that third note. Not the spelling mistakes. She's 9, and the spelling doesn't matter. What matters is that she wrote it at all. Nobody told her to. Nobody coached her. She just knew, the way children sometimes know things before adults are willing to admit them, that something was wrong. And she did something about it. She folded a piece of paper and pressed it into my coat pocket when nobody was looking. That's what I come back to when I try to make sense of everything that happened. There's a version of the story where I'm the villain. I've heard that version. Some people, even people who were kind to me through all of it, gently suggested that I could have called more, visited less, read the signals earlier. And they weren't entirely wrong. I drove 40 minutes with a pot of soup on a Sunday, when what I really needed was to sit with the fact that Harold's chair was empty. I told myself I was doing it for them. That wasn't the whole truth, and I know it now. But here's what I've come to understand about cause and effect, about the way our choices build toward outcomes we don't always see coming. The things that went wrong in my family did not go wrong because I loved too much. They went wrong because certain feelings went unnamed for too long on all sides. My son-in-law's resentment, my daughter's inability to hold space for both her husband and her mother at the same time, my own loneliness after Harold passed, which I dressed up as helpfulness, because helpfulness was something I knew how to do, and grief was something I did not. None of that excuses a restraining order over a Christmas card. But understanding it, really sitting with it, which is different from excusing it, was the only way I could stop being a victim of it. That's what my therapist helped me see. That wisdom isn't about being right. It's about being honest enough with yourself to ask the harder question, which is not, why did they do this to me, but what was I not seeing and what can I see now? That kind of honesty takes something. It takes a willingness to hold two uncomfortable things at once. That you were wronged and that you were not blameless. And then there's what it takes to keep going after something like this. I want to be clear that it was not easy. There were mornings after the hearing when I woke up, and the first thought in my head was the look on my daughter's face when she wouldn't turn around. 31 years as a nurse taught me that the body keeps score of things the mind tries to put away. I felt it in my shoulders, in the way I'd hesitate before texting her. Recovery from something like this is not a moment. It's a long, unglamorous series of days where you choose to get up and go to the YMCA and swim your laps and come home and make your tea and try again tomorrow. What I want to say to anyone watching this who is somewhere in the middle of their own version of what I lived through is this. Your integrity is not measured by whether your family recognizes it. It is measured by whether you can look at yourself clearly enough to own your part, and clearly enough to refuse to own what isn't yours, and then keep showing up anyway, in whatever way you're allowed. My granddaughter painted me a house with a yellow door. She does it every week, like she promised. I have 7 of them on my refrigerator now. That's what kept going, looks like. Sometimes it looks like 7 watercolor paintings by a 9-year-old who decided, all on her own, that her grandmother was worth finding.